everybody, it's Dominique, and I'm here today to present to you Skull, a bluffing game for 3 to 6 players. Setup for this game could not be easier. Gather everyone around a table and give each player a game mat that sits skull side up and the matching set of 4 cards. The card faces have flowers on 3 of them and a skull on 1. Players should keep the faces of their cards to themselves. Next, give everyone a coaster for their drinks, and warn them about putting a drink on any of the player mats or cards. This rule isn't in the official setup of the game, but if you don't want to have to kick anyone out of game night because they put their drink on these beautiful game pieces, you might want to include this step. Now, on to the gameplay. Skull takes place over several rounds, and each round has 3 key steps. Step number 1, randomly decide who is the first player. Everyone else looks at their 4 cards, secretly picks one, and places it face down on their player mat. Secretly, so that no one knows if you put down a card with a flower or a card with a skull. Once everyone has placed their card face down, under the first player's watchful eye, the first player can now play a card of their choosing. Step 2, starting with the first player, so directly after the first player plays their first card, play moves clockwise around the group, with each player deciding between one of 2 options. Option 1 is to add an extra disc on top of the one they've already played. Because this starts with the first player, they may end up placing 2 cards down back to back. When adding discs to the pile, make sure that you set them off slightly, so it will help every other see just how many discs have been played on the board. Option number 2 is to initiate a challenge. If a player cannot or does not want to play an additional disc, the player issues a challenge. And herein lies the crux of the game. A challenge consists of the player announcing how many cards they believe they can flip over without flipping over a card that has a skull on it. This challenge must always include the player's own cards. So for example here, between these 3 players, 5 cards have been played. The green player sets a challenge at 3, meaning that they think that they can flip over 3 cards without flipping over a card with a skull. The challenge moves around the group clockwise, giving every other player a chance to either pass by sliding their mat to the center of the table and sitting out the challenge, or a chance to increase the bid. Maybe the yellow player believes that they can flip 4 cards over before getting a skull, but the red player passes. Play gets back to the green player, and either they increase the bid or they pass. And for this example, green player is going to decide to pass. So step 3, it is now up to the yellow player to attempt their bid of 4. The bid includes all the cards on the table, but the one who is attempting the challenge must always start with their own cards. So the yellow player has 2 cards down already, which they knew were both flowers. So now, they choose 2 other cards on the table to flip to complete their bid attempt of 4. Discs need to be flipped one by one, but they can be done in any order once the player has flipped up their own cards. The one attempting the challenge doesn't need to flip over all of another player's cards. They can choose to flip only one here, one there, or they can choose to flip them all. However, if they flip them all, it needs to be one at a time, starting with the top card. Hey, look at that! The yellow player was successful. They managed to flip over 4 cards and not flip over a single skull. So the round is now over and the yellow player has 1 successful challenge. To keep track of points, the yellow player flips over their playmat to the flower side. To win the game, the player needs to win 2 challenges. But what if the yellow player had flipped a skull? That means their attempt immediately stops. And as punishment for their failed attempt, the challenger loses a disc for good. They gather up all their discs and shuffle them face down. And then the player whose skull was flipped chooses a disc at random from the challenger's hand to discard. However, the card gets discarded face down in the middle of the table. This way, only the challenger knows which card they've lost. Was it a flower? Was it a skull? Only they will know. After that, whether the challenge was a success or a failure, the challenger is the first player in the next round. So as before, the first step is everyone plays their card, followed by the first player playing their first card. Then step 2 begins, and so on and so on. If at any point a player loses all of their cards from 4 failed attempts, they are out of the game. If there's only 1 player left standing, they are automatically the winner. If someone is down to their last card and it's a skull, they're able to keep playing as normal. However, if anyone flips over their skull, not only does the challenger who flipped failed their challenge, but the player whose skull was flipped is out of the game. Skull is a game of bluff, so don't let the simple premise fool you. It is fraught with opportunities to mess with your opponent's heads and trick your way into coming out on top. No one ever needs to reveal their cards unless they are flipped up during a challenge, meaning that their strategies can stay safely tucked away. After a round or two, everyone at the table will be laughing and counting cards. Competitive players will be looking at others for their tell like they're at the finals of the World Poker Championship. If you're looking for a great fun bluffing game, our group definitely recommends Skull. However, if you're looking for multiple bluffing games to switch out throughout the night, maybe also check out Cockroach Poker, a fun game where you slide cards face down to someone and say, "This is a stink bug," and they have to tell you if you're lying or not. It's worth it for the fun cards alone. Or maybe you want to check out Coup, a game where there are heads of the family who need to bluff and bribe their way to power by being a terrible person. Now, it actually came as a bit of a surprise to us that our box expert was very interested in this teeny tiny box. He couldn't fit in it, but he tried his best. For more games like Skull, Coup, and Cockroach Poker, check out the Comic Hunter or thecomichunter.net. Happy gaming!